In this episode, we get to talk to Tom Koeller, our media director here at Epicosity. We're going to be asking about the ever-shifting world of media and how that affects our students that we're targeting in our higher education strategies. Welcome, Tom. Thank you for being here. Just for context, before we dive into some of these questions, can you give us a little bit of context on your role, what you do here at Epicosity, and what you do for our higher education clients?
Yeah, so in my role on the Commons team here at Epicosity, my job primarily has been piecing together student journeys across all of our different tactics, picking the right tools for the job, whether it's a TikTok-focused campaign around an event, or whether it's something more broad-reaching brand awareness-focused, where we're really looking to impact the community and all the various shareholders beyond just students as well. So you can even think of secondary audiences like parents, alumni, things like that. So making sure that we're getting the most out of every single dollar spent at the agency from a media perspective is something that is a huge part of my role as well. And then facilitating that at a higher level across broadly what's working for higher education, whether it's for community colleges or for universities, and exploring the subtle differences between those to do the best for each one of our clients individually.
Awesome. Well, and that's kind of the first question, right? Is media really feels like a primary driver of what an agency like us does. So being at the forefront of that for us has been super helpful for our clients. But what, in your estimation, has been some of the biggest changes in media and in higher ed, sort of cross-referenced in your time here, or since you've been working in the industry?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's really interesting because a lot of schools really could lean on their reputation in the past. They were able to really leverage, school logo here, color here, really leverage that and kind of ride the coattails of that as far as they could. But especially in the last 10 years, the way higher education has changed due to multiple factors, things have really shifted to a point where we really need to focus on selling outcomes now rather than programs. Yeah. And so that's been a big focus of ours in exploring that space because students really are expecting a personalized journey on their path. They want to be recruited. They want to be given valuable information. Yeah. And to that end, it's really important that we continue to, and some schools are doing a good job of this, but really start to consider themselves not just what they're saying about themselves, but actually the experience that students are having as part of their brand. Yeah,
absolutely. We were talking to Luke, VP of Creative, and he had a similar sentiment about just the messaging and the creative and the personalized student journeys and being really authentic to that. So like the other side of the coin being the delivery of that message, right? Which is really cool. So what do you think, we have a saying here at Epicosity of buying audiences, not channels. And I love that. But what does that exactly mean for someone who maybe doesn't work at this agency?
Yeah, of course. It's just about shifting your focus away from how we're targeting people to who we're targeting. So we're not just looking to launch a meta campaign. We're looking to specifically target first-gen students from the Midwest who have STEM interests, like that level of targeting, and then applying that across all of our different platforms and different means of reaching them in the best way and the best frequency so that they're seeing us on YouTube while they're scrolling during lunch, and they're seeing us on Instagram Reels at 11 p.m. before they go to bed. Yeah. And so reaching them in those different ways at the right times is the way you think about it, because you can put every tool is good for something, but they really work together like a band almost, where each one can kind of provide something special. But it's when you layer them all together and are reaching people in a multitude of different ways that you can really start to kind of move things and impact the area that you're looking to make that difference in.
Well, I like that sort of composer, right? You sort of have to get everybody playing in sync. But, what has been some of the challenges, or how do we know when all of those tools and those instruments are working or when they're not?
Sure. Yeah. So I think the big thing there is really evaluating each one as part of a whole. And so prioritizing which channels you're on, because ideally you want to be everywhere all at once. That's the ideal scenario. Yeah. And most schools just don't have that type of marketing budget. And so building around your priorities in terms of your primary student base. Are they older? Are they younger? Are they looking at specific programs? What are the differentiating factors you as an institution bring to the table when it comes to recruiting students and leading them to success, because the outcomes, again, are what's important to those kids.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, when we think about the tailored messaging and this audience segmentation that we do on the creative side, sort of being in sync from a strategy perspective and a media perspective are also important. Can you talk about kind of the relationship that you have with the creative storytelling aspect, or is that something you're kind of reacting to and responding to and choosing the best prescription for, say, a parent campaign or, a transfer student campaign, and kind of how the nuances work there?
Yeah, that's a good question. That reminds me, we've had really good success recently. I know driving campaigns for parents specifically, especially around events. So things like college process and what they have to do and what their kids might have to do. And so they're often more motivated in some respects, depending on what the answers they need are. And so building campaigns around parents is something that is extremely important, because if you're only targeting students, that of course is your primary audience. But when it comes to parents, you're really ignoring half the story, because it's a family decision for a lot of different students, different potential students. And especially when you think of things like first-gen students, it's so much a family decision to make that choice to enroll in a program. Maybe it's program specific, or maybe it's the first family member in America who's attending a school. So
interesting.
So it's you should not ignore parents, I guess, is basically what that answer is.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've been to conferences and we've seen things where, the importance of parents, and you sort of kind of throw them in as kind of a bonus audience. But I know you and your team have been really focused on what's the message there, and working with Luke and his team to sort of have that real true segmentation and personalization there. Have you had any surprises, things that came up during a recent campaign, or maybe a campaign in the past, that you didn't anticipate, and what was that about?
Sure. So I think one thing that's becoming clear is there's a lot of focus on forums and those type of places where discussions are taking place.
Yeah, makes sense.
You think things like Reddit or Quora or even Discord are starting to be places where people are seeking answers, and I think a lot of it's due to just, the life-changing
big decision
that you're making, and wanting to get all of the data first, hear all the dirt from other people. And so those conversations are happening in a lot of those places. And so I think if you can find a way to leverage that, and we're working on that with a lot of what we do here for media as well, where we've done campaigns on Reddit and looking to get involved in some of those other spaces, but some of them are just so organically driven discussions that it almost strays a little bit from media, but those are places that are important to monitor, important to maybe contribute in order to connect people to the answers they're looking for.
Do you have, well, that's interesting too, sorry. We spoke to Luke earlier today, who talked about sort of Gen Alpha and Gen Z being really interested in community. And so that just speaks to that point of knowing that from a creative perspective, but, using that and leveraging that for the media world as well. Do you have, when you're running a campaign, sort of a key indicator that's oh, this one's good. This campaign's going to hit. We're going to hit the targets. Is there a measurable, or just a feeling, or the targeting's right on? Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's a big one. So I think research is a huge part of that.
Sure.
Digging into how certain audiences index on those platforms, digging into the composition of those audiences, and then applying our ads. And if the platform's targeting suits as well, because just having the audience there isn't enough when it comes from a media perspective. We have to make sure that the tool we have has the targeting capabilities to actually hit those audiences. So I would say research, there's a big component to that. Also, past performance is a huge piece of that, where we want to see, we've actually run campaigns for client A, for example, and we've seen this tactic is just always exceeding expectations. And so, I think just to riff on a couple of them lately, I guess TikTok's been one, programmatic audio has been one. But we're seeing different subtleties within the colleges as well, where by and large, there's similarities across the country, but different regions, different things like that also play a big factor too. So just because something worked for someone doesn't mean it's going to work for everyone. And so that's why we tailor our approach towards each client.
That's awesome. Now, I'd like to play a game. I'm going to present you some situations, some scenarios, and you just give me your thoughts on them. Maybe they move us closer, maybe they move us further away from what we're trying to do in higher ed. So a client wants to spend 90% of a budget on TikTok for 1 week. What do you say to that?
I would call that one a distraction, unless you're looking to harness a specific viral moment and you have an entire content strategy built around that moment. So you think of something like maybe you're leveraging something around the Super Bowl, specifically targeting Gen Z or something like that. If you have a content machine ready to go behind that, then I think that could be very distinctive. But I think it's a distraction otherwise. That's a lot of budget to devote to one tactic. And you really have to think of something like TikTok it's a content machine. And so if you don't have a strategy behind it, it's really not going to perform the way you want it to.
Speaking of TikTok, and we've mentioned it a few times, some states disallow the use of a public institution to use the platform. What kind of challenges or unique scenarios have you run into where that, that platform is where our audience is or where that audience might be, but you are sort of hamstrung and can't take advantage of it as, the client's paid media buyer? What's the solution there, or what conversations do you have with clients about TikTok specifically?
Yeah, of course. Our philosophy as a media department here at Epicosity has always been to deliver the best plan possible for a client. And so that involves whatever tactics we are capable of using and whatever tactics are allowed by their institution as well.
Yeah.
And so, of course, that finds its way into our ideal media mix more often than not.
Yeah.
When it comes to situations where we can't actually use it, though, we look at alternatives. So we look at other high index tactics, ones that are good with our primary audiences, often things like Instagram Reels, YouTube Shorts are probably a couple of my favorite alternatives, and then Snapchat as well being involved. And so it's sort of just going back to the priority question. If your top priority gets knocked off your list, you move down to the next one, and you continue to mold those together in the way that's going to best serve the client. And then, of course, like a lot of things in the media landscape, it's constant to subject change, constant
again, isn't
things that are going to evolve. And you know, ideally, maybe the next time you revisit a media plan with them, potentially it's back on the table due to changing factors, which, things change fast in higher education.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. Well, back to distinction versus distraction. I appreciate that answer. What if a client only advertises to parents, no students?
Well, I did mention how important parents are earlier, but a thing to remember, though, is that while parents control the wallet, students control the brand. And so being able to address that audience up front is the most important thing. And they're going to make their own decisions, ultimately. And so treating students as a primary audience is going to be the main way to drive success. And so that includes behind-the-scenes type things, so being able to be kind of provide a sort of unfinished view of what the campus is and harness what the students are saying about it, especially when it's positive. Like those are huge assets that a lot of colleges might not necessarily have. So if you're lucky enough to have one of those, that should be leveraged towards that student audience in particular. And never lose sight of the focus that they're ultimately going to be the ones making the decision. And so while parents are important, I would say that that's more of a distraction.
Interesting. I like that. Building a media plan solely based on last year's performance. Distinction or distraction?
I would say that's a major distraction for that one.
Interesting.
The past results are definitely important, and we definitely take that into account, but think of it more like a calibration tool rather than an actual thing to build. If we just talked about how fast the media landscape changes, new tactics emerge, advertising becomes a possibility on certain platforms where it never has been before. Just considering this year, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, there were no ads on Netflix. There were no ads on some of these other streaming services.
Those bastards.
There were much better targeting parameters on Meta.
We ruin everything.
There's all kinds of advertising comes for everything eventually. And as far as that goes, the other thing is just understanding how fast things can change. But also that if you're building based on last year's plan and your plan is exactly the same as last year, you're optimizing for a world that doesn't exist anymore. And so it's important to always look to dig into research, look at performance in the past, sure, but again, use it more as a calibration tool than a driving factor.
Love it. Thank you, Tom. We talked with the creatives specifically about sort of breaking free from, our sea of sameness. We say it all the time here. And I think there's a version of that for media too, right? But, one of the key factors in determining whether an institution feels safe enough to take a risk is the internal culture. And so I think that's probably a similar, across all client teams, specifically media. But what do you think on the client side in an institution culture helps drive a better media strategy or a media plan?
Yeah, I would say sometimes, and this is true for a lot of different departments here at the agency, I'm sure, but it's acting as almost a media therapist of sorts, where understanding their fears and then bringing them back to the results that are going to be driven by certain changes. So, for example, maybe TikTok is scary, but remember Instagram Reels was pretty new 5-6 years ago. A lot of people didn't think it was going to be a thing that worked out for them. And now you can see some of the results from that. And so always bringing it back to, again, more of the outcomes. So, okay, yes, this is something different. here's what we've seen from case studies, here's what we've seen from other clients, here are some results that I can drive for you as well, and then being able to deliver on those results as well when the time comes.
Yeah.
So that's the way you can build trust over time, and also take advantage of opportunities to test those tactics. So maybe it has a smaller budget this year, and we did this quite often with TikTok years ago, was giving it a small portion of the budget, just giving it a few months, and then evaluating it and making decisions based on some of those results.
A little bit of a test campaign.
Yeah, kind of dip your toe in the water. You know,
I like that.
You don't have to dive in. You don't have to throw your entire institution's budget behind something.
90%
but
of
test
it.
the water,
Awesome.
and next thing you know, you might find that's
Interesting.
it's quite comfortable.
Cool. Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I think, those mindsets, right, of like a little scary, a little risky, just by nature, higher education is risk averse. Similarly, you've worked in the financial services industry here at the agency too. Similar kind of vibe, right? What do you think is holding them back from some of that kind of risk forward thinking internally?
Yeah, I think there's just some institutional legacy things going on there, I think, with a lot of colleges, which makes sense. Again, like going back for long time, it's been able to just lean on a reputation, lean on some of the things that are tried and true and have always worked. But I think in a lot of ways, in life as well as in marketing, sometimes just standing still is almost the scariest thing you can do. So whether you're scared or not, you really need to adapt to the new world and do everything you can to stay ahead of it, because it's constantly changing, and a lot of the challenges that higher ed in particular is facing need to be addressed head on, and you need to form solutions to it rather than staying static. And so I'd say in a lot of ways, it's more scary to stay in the same spot when you think about it. Yeah. I think that
interesting.
It's an old saying where it's just what happens if you don't change?
Yeah, inaction is action,
Nothing,
right?
And, that's kind of what can happen.
Absolutely. What would you say? So, you've worked with plenty of client teams, and you're leaned on heavily in a lot of client strategy, because whether a lack of resources or expertise or just manpower on the client side, you have a singular person creating the content, running the media, taking pictures at the event. They're sort of jack of all trades, but, kind of expected to know some of the things that you're sort of engrossed in all day, every day, learning about this sort of ever-changing media world. What advice would you give a marketing team or a marketing leader who's got one of those on their team to better their media strategy or the way that they think about media? Yeah,
I would say don't underestimate the little things. Things like just effective tracking, things like answering experience questions as well. Like, what is this actual experience like for a 17-year-old who might not be as motivated as you might think in order to take the next action? How can you remove obstacles? How can you make things simpler? So I'd say don't forget about the basics, the blocking and tackling, if you will, of like running a campaign or doing something small where it doesn't need to be overly complex and doesn't need to contain a multitude of tactics necessarily. But as long as you nailed the blocking, the tackling, the basics, you get all that stuff right, as well as the tracking, and that's going to put you in a spot to succeed and potentially improve on that.
Awesome. So we, primarily get calls and conversations happening with us about digital media, right? We talk about all the platforms and all of the things and the targeting capabilities, but linear is still a big part of what Epicosity and you yourself lead here. How do you keep those two things straight, as you're thinking about a university recruitment campaign that needs to incorporate both or wants to lean heavily into digital, or is there a place for linear, right? You sort of have these conversations daily. How do you keep those things aligned, and how do you prioritize linear versus digital in a campaign?
Yeah, absolutely. So it all goes back to your overall goals and KPIs, right?
Sure.
And I think most schools would agree that you definitely need to develop your brand and cultivate the brand, and maybe take some more wide-reaching tactics like outdoor buys or linear or experiential, interesting opportunities like that. But you also need to focus on the recruitment side. So bringing in those students, filling in the programs that you need to fill, and making sure that the university or technical college is running smoothly.
Yeah.
And so those are things that you have to take into account. But I definitely think linear has a place. And I think when you are doing those brand buys, it's really important to connect yourself to that community as well. And so to that end, we often are working hard to build partnerships within those communities that we serve. So whether it's with TV stations, billboard companies, radio stations, always looking to cultivate those relationships and make sure that that's a tool that we can harness for the school to better the university and improve brand awareness, which ultimately, if you can do brand awareness really well, it's going to help your enrollment as well. So those two work together, and it's just a matter of priorities there. But I definitely see them as being a huge priority for schools that have that ability to extend out and really look to make an impact brand-wise.
Nice. Do you have a preference? Do you like digital over linear or linear over digital, or do you have a favorite tactic or channel that you're loving right now?
I think as someone like myself who really got into media based on numbers, based on data, and based on more of an analytical side, I definitely slant a little bit more digital from my roots.
Sure.
I think everything has a place, though, and just the fact that we're starting to be able to piece together these journeys digitally is really, really special and exciting to me, where we can actually see some of the impacts of tactics that are really hard to track in the past. And so things like streaming television and where that falls into a student's journey and how they end up converting, that's something we have the ability to finally do now. So it's just been such an exciting time as far as digital goes that I'll give that the edge. But yeah,
still got a space in your heart for a nice 30-second ad buy. TV spot.
Absolutely. Especially during big events, that's huge. So I think like sports is a big driver of a lot of those things, but I'd say like appointment television in general. And so you can consider things like potentially who your audience is matters a lot in this, but things like news or things like specific shows that are on, like Bachelor in Paradise. I know I think you might be a fan potentially.
Through my wife, but yes, thank you.
So yeah, those apportment viewing, those appointment programs, I think are special places to get ad placements in. And so a little bit older school, but like it's all about we're all about moving the needle and getting eyeballs. So those are some of the ways that we can leverage linear as well.
That's awesome.
So throw them that, even though digital probably just gets the nod for me as my preferred. But
cool. Well, I have some thoughts. You mentioned media therapy a little bit earlier. I've got some media therapy questions for you. So have you ever had a plan just fall flat, totally flop, did not work?
Well, no, all of our plans are perfect and nothing ever goes wrong. No,
I like that answer.
To be serious,
as the sales guy,
no, to be serious though, like we've done a lot of different styles of campaigns, and I guess one example that pops out is I know we were looking to do some geofencing, but it's such a specific area for such a specific time. I believe it's a graduation type event, and we just struggled to get the results out of it that were expected. Yeah, and I know we had a lot of discussions with the client and. We were a little on the fence about even trying to accomplish that, but we gave it a shot. But the issue was just the volume wasn't there. We weren't getting enough people through that campaign to drive the results they wanted, and it ultimately ended up being a little bit disappointing. Sure. And so it definitely happens, but that's one that I've thought of recently. Yeah.
Have you ever tried, client has expectations, you're trying to sort of push the envelope, they're trying a new tactic. What's the conversation like with them when, again, you're pushing them out of their comfort zone? You mentioned going back to the data. What if there is no data and we just have to sort of take a leap of faith? Is that something that's in your toolbox that you've had to have a discussion with a client about?
Yeah, I think that's definitely more of a stair-step approach where you have to say like,
ease them into it a little bit.
Yeah, look, this is something new, it's something different. Let's give this a shot though. If you want to greenlight this, we're gonna run this to the best of our ability, and we got the people to do it. So give us an opportunity here, and let's test it. Let's test it and see. Maybe we test it against something that they love potentially. And perhaps the client's a huge fan of Instagram Reels, Instagram Stories, and so maybe then it is like splitting that budget in half, and let's just run a test. Let's run a test and see how we do. See how a TikTok does against that, or see how a YouTube Shorts does against that. And then those results always speak for themselves, and they can kind of dictate how we go about things in the future.
Are people as romantic about media as they are about creative? Or is it sort of a different tone when you're having conversations about strategy and numbers through kind of analytics and spreadsheet lens versus sort of the awesome, pretty pictures that the creatives get to bring to the room?
Oh, well, it's hard not to be biased in that answer, Justin, because of course I love the media world, love living in it, but there's definitely differences in how you go about it. Yeah. I think having the numbers to back you up is harder to do for creative. Sure. And also less necessary for creative. Sure. Whereas media, it's a little bit inverse. So way more focused on the numbers and what's behind it rather than necessarily the emotion, although believe me, there's a lot of emotion in media as well. So,
have you guys had anything recently that would just knocked it out of the park, and sort of the story there, if there is one, or what have you seen recently that's been positive for client?
Yeah, so I think going back to the multiple touch points and how those all work together has been a strategy that we've employed a few different times and always almost received positive feedback. Good. Because it's important, again, to be there for each part of their journey. And so putting all of our eggs in one basket, if you have the budget,
Yeah.
to go beyond that
Yeah.
is definitely worth doing.
Cool.
Because we've seen lots of results that indicate that having a presence on these 4 different social channels is actually the best way to go, if possible. And of course, a lot of those questions do come down to budget.
Yeah.
And again, the prioritization of those channels. But if you can reach people in a bunch of different ways over the course of a year and start to
Yeah.
stack those years on top of each other, that's when you're going to start to actually see more institutional growth and movement. And
Interesting.
we've been able to stem some dwindling enrollments with some of those strategies.
Awesome. If you had to choose one platform digitally to, maybe it's a small budget, maybe it's a team with not a lot of resources, what would you tell them to invest in?
That's a tough one. I'd
Might
say
be
the,
loaded,
the
sorry.
caveat is sort of what you have at your disposal.
Sure.
Because I think one of my knee-jerk answers to that would be a programmatic campaign, which would likely
Okay.
consist of,
Yeah.
display, audio, streaming. And now I know like some of those are easier to access than others
Sure.
as far as the DSPs involved. And so it can be tougher to get involved in those. And so I'd say social and search are a really good 1-2 punch.
Yeah.
So if you are shorter in resources, perhaps
Sure.
you don't have access to some of these other tactics that have more robust targeting capabilities and attribution, then I would say potentially shifting to a search social type strategy and then prioritize based potentially even on your organic presence on some of those.
Oh, interesting,
Can
yeah.
you leverage your Facebook page or your TikTok profile
Mm-hmm.
to drive that performance? Do you have a good following there? Are you
Yeah.
able to leverage those students' actual students' testimonials or things students are sharing and
Yeah.
use those as part of what you're doing socially? And then putting some money behind that from a paid perspective could be a good
Sure.
combination for someone who's more strapped on resources,
Yeah.
but does have, you got to make the most of
Something,
what you
yeah.
have. Yeah. You kind of
Cool.
look around. It's when you trying to make dinner and you look around in the cupboards and maybe you don't have enough for a full meal, but you
Yeah.
have enough to make a really, really good main course or something like that.
Cool. Thank you. Right on. So to finish this off, I've got some just rapid questions, sort of a rapid fire round. Off the top of your head, you can explain if you want, you can expand if you want, but you don't have to. But I'm just going to fire a few at you. Rapid distinction. I'm just going to fire them off. Okay, you ready?
Yeah, let's go.
A platform higher ed underestimates.
Interesting. I would say for that one, I would go with going back to our discussion forum type question earlier. I would
Yeah.
say that Reddit is probably one that's underestimated. There's so many different hubs for college or higher education driven discussions there, and people are having those discussions whether you're privy to them or not.
Right.
And so having a presence to be involved in that platform, I think, is an exciting opportunity for a lot of clients. And it's definitely messy, but that's also part of why
It's so
it has such
underutilized, yeah.
because it is like easy to find, and there's a lot of things right now that are culminating with sort of this. They're really impacting search, I want to say, because Google search, for example, it used to be the tried and true, always there, and it still is an effective tool. But you look at things that are eating away at that, and Reddit results popping up ahead of that, AI results popping up ahead of
Yeah.
that. So we're seeing all kinds of changes when it comes to search, and I think having a presence on Reddit is definitely something that a lot of people don't necessarily pursue, even though it could be an effective medium for them.
PSA about those AI answers, you got to double check those.
Yep, 100%.
Yeah, I'll tell that story a different time, but thank you. One thing institutions just need to stop doing in their media plans.
This could be more of a creative or media, I guess,
Sure.
but like stop talking at students, I would say. Students can definitely
Easy
sense
to do.
ads, and it's very
Yeah.
easy to do. And so I'd say it's important to make sure that you're providing them with value. Students want value. They don't want volume. So
I like it.
hitting them from all different angles with these apply now messages isn't necessarily the best way to go. And so being able to provide that valuable information to them and give them the answers they need, that's what's going to help move them along the journey.
Love it. Insight or advice to higher education teams about media ROI?
As far as ROI goes, I would say it's not how much you're spending, it's how smart you're spending. And so when it comes to media dollars in particular, are you investing in data infrastructure? Are you building out the ways to actually show effective attribution for your media tactics? Because that's something that often is very tough to connect to your marketing as well as your whatever you're using for a CRM, how those students are reached out to. That's a huge. There's a lot of factors there.
Yeah.
And so being able to build that data infrastructure behind things and being able to actually supply that ROI question, that's very difficult to do, but that's something you're going to have to build out. And with the future in mind, if you want to finally get to that ROI that everyone's really pursuing, and might not
infamous closed loop that
Chasing
we're all
the dragon
after.
a little.
Oh, I like that, chasing
Yeah.
the dragon. Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you, Tom, for being here. We appreciate it. Hopefully we can have a part 2. We can talk to you again, check up on campaigns and how things are doing. Anything you want to say to the people?
No, just excited to be here, and
Awesome.
hit some questions and have some good discussions.
Good. Thanks, Tom. I appreciate you.